You can sleep in your car for all I care, Evelyn, my daughter-in-law said while sliding my suitcase across the front porch with one hand and holding a glass of wine in the other. My son stood beside her in complete silence, staring down at the expensive hardwood floor that I had helped pay for 12 years earlier. The cold October wind brushed against my cheeks as I looked at the two people I once believed would be the center of my life forever. I was 68 years old, widowed for less than 4 months, and standing outside the house where I used to bake birthday cakes for my grandson every Sunday afternoon. The porch light flickered softly above us, while neighbors across the street pretended not to watch. The house feels crowded now, Vanessa continued with a smile that never reached her eyes. And honestly, Caleb agrees this arrangement isn't working anymore. I looked at my son, hoping for even the smallest sign of hesitation, but he only rubbed the back of his neck and sighed like a tired businessman ending a meeting that had gone on too long. "Mom, maybe this is for the best," he muttered quietly. For the best. Those words settled into my chest heavier than the overnight bag sitting beside my feet. 3 months earlier, after Harold passed away from heart failure, Caleb insisted I move in with them temporarily. He had hugged me tightly at the funeral and promised I would never have to face life alone. Vanessa cried beside him that day, holding my hand in church while everyone praised her kindness. Looking back now, I realized she only cried when people were watching. I bent down slowly and picked up my suitcase handle. My fingers trembled, though I refused to let them see how badly this hurt. Across the hallway mirror behind them, I caught my reflection for a brief second. Silver hair neatly brushed, navy wool coat buttoned carefully to the top. Pearl earrings Harold bought me on our 40th anniversary. I still looked like a respectable woman, but suddenly I felt invisible. "I'll leave tonight," I said calmly. Vanessa immediately relaxed her shoulders as if she had been holding her breath waiting for me to argue. That was the moment I understood. Something painful. She never feared my anger. She only feared my presence. I stepped off the porch without another word and placed my suitcase into the trunk of my old Buick. The engine coughed twice before finally starting. Through the windshield, I saw my grandson Liam standing quietly near the staircase inside the house, clutching the sleeve of his hoodie while staring at me with wide, confused eyes. Vanessa quickly pulled the curtain closed before he could wave goodbye. I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets for nearly an hour while the radio hummed low Christmas advertisements even though Halloween hadn't arrived yet. Every traffic light felt longer than usual. Every intersection reminded me I no longer had a place to go. Finally, I parked beside a small 24-hour diner outside Millbrook Avenue. The waitress brought me black coffee without asking questions. Maybe she recognized the expression on my face. Maybe lonely women all look the same after midnight. I wrapped both hands around the warm mug and stared through the fogged-up window while rain began falling softly onto the empty parking lot. Then my phone vibrated. One new message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it until I noticed the preview. "Mrs. Carter, there's something your husband wanted you to know before he died." I stared at the message on my phone for nearly a full minute before unlocking the screen. The rain outside had become heavier, sliding down the diner windows in long, crooked lines that blurred the streetlights beyond the parking lot. My coffee had gone cold, untouched between my hands. For a moment, I considered deleting the message entirely. After everything that had happened tonight, I did not think my heart could survive one more unpleasant surprise. But Harold had never been careless with words. If someone claimed he wanted me to know something before he died, I needed to hear it. I opened the message slowly. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I worked with your husband for 17 years. Harold asked me to contact you only if something happened to him and you were left alone." My chest tightened instantly. Left alone. Harold must have known. Somehow before his heart attack, before the funeral flowers and sympathy casseroles and empty promises from family, he must have seen what was coming. Another message appeared before I could reply. "I know this sounds strange, but your husband protected you more than you realize. Vanessa never wanted you living with them permanently." I lowered the phone onto the table carefully, as though the words themselves carried weight. Around me, the diner remained quiet except for the soft clinking of dishes from the kitchen. A truck driver sat near the counter eating pie while an older couple shared a booth by the front door. Ordinary people living ordinary evenings while my entire life seemed to unravel hour by hour. I thought back to the weeks after Harold passed away. Vanessa had insisted on handling everything. She organized the memorial service, managed the paperwork, even answered calls that should have come directly to me. At the time, I told myself she was simply trying to help. Grief makes you grateful for any hand reaching toward you. But now small memories return differently. The way she discouraged me from looking through Harold's office. The way she redirected conversations whenever finances came up. The way Caleb stopped discussing family matters around me altogether. I picked up my phone again with trembling fingers. What do you mean he protected me? 3 dots appeared immediately. Daniel answered faster than someone sending casual messages. Your husband discovered financial transfers connected to Caleb and Vanessa last year. He believed they were hiding debt. He changed several documents after that. My breathing slowed. Harold had always been careful with money. During our 43 years together, he balanced every checkbook by hand and kept tax records organized in neat labeled folders inside his office cabinet. He trusted people slowly, including our own son. If he changed documents because of Caleb and Vanessa, then something serious must have frightened him. I glanced toward the parking lot where my Buick sat under the flickering neon sign. Inside the trunk were 2 suitcases, a framed wedding photo, and the quilt my mother stitched for me in 1978. That was everything I owned tonight. Everything except questions. Daniel sent another message. There is a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Harold instructed the bank manager not to release it unless you came in personally with identification. My pulse quickened so suddenly I felt dizzy. Harold never mentioned any safety deposit box to me. Not once. I looked down at my wedding ring resting against the coffee mug. For months after his death, I had replayed our final conversation endlessly in my mind. Harold sitting in his recliner with a blanket over his knees. Harold squeezing my hand weakly and telling me not to worry about anything because he had taken care of us. At the time, I thought he meant life insurance and retirement savings. But maybe he meant something else entirely. Maybe my husband knew our son would betray me long before I did. I barely slept that night. Around 2 in the morning, I drove to a modest roadside motel just outside town because the thought of sitting alone in the diner until sunrise made the loneliness feel even sharper. The room smelled faintly like old carpet cleaner and stale coffee, but it was warm, quiet, and cheap enough for one night. I placed my suitcase near the bed and sat on the edge of the mattress without turning on the television. The silence pressed heavily against me. For years, Harold and I had ended every evening the same way. He would read in his recliner while I folded laundry or worked on crossword puzzles beside him. Sometimes we barely spoke for an hour, yet I never once felt alone. Now every quiet moment felt enormous. I took off my pearl earrings carefully and placed them beside the lamp. My hands paused when I noticed my wedding ring trembling slightly against the wooden nightstand. I realized then that I had not cried since leaving Caleb's house. Not during Vanessa's cruel words. Not while loading my belongings into the Buick. Not even while reading Daniel's messages. The grief sat deeper than tears now. It felt heavier, colder. Around 6 in the morning, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. The bank opens at 9. Ask for Margaret Holloway. Harold trusted her. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back a simple thank you. Outside the motel window, the parking lot slowly brightened beneath a gray autumn sky. A delivery truck rolled past the highway while distant church bells rang somewhere across town. Life moved forward with cruel normalcy, even when yours had collapsed overnight. I drove to First National Bank 20 minutes before opening. The building stood downtown between a pharmacy and an old insurance office Harold used for years. I remembered sitting beside him there every April during tax season while he joked with the tellers and complained about interest rates like every retired man in America. Back then, I thought we would grow old quietly together. I thought loyalty inside a family was permanent. At exactly 9 o'clock, the front doors unlocked. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and printer ink. A young receptionist greeted me politely until I mentioned Margaret Holloway's name. Her expression shifted instantly. One moment, Mrs. Carter. A few minutes later, a woman in her early 60s approached wearing a navy blazer and silver glasses. The moment she saw me, her face softened with something close to sympathy. Mrs. Carter, she said quietly. I was wondering when you might come. The words unsettled me immediately. She led me into a private office near the back of the bank where framed certificates covered the walls beside family photographs. Once the door closed, Margaret folded her hands neatly across her desk and looked at me carefully before speaking. Your husband visited me 3 times during the months before his passing, she explained gently. He was very concerned about certain financial activities connected to your son and daughter-in-law. Hearing someone else confirm it out loud made my stomach tighten. Even now, part of me wanted this all to be some terrible misunderstanding. Margaret opened a locked drawer and removed a thick manila envelope with Harold's handwriting across the front. My breath caught instantly at the sight of it. I knew every curve of that handwriting after 43 years together. Harold instructed me to release this only if you ever found yourself financially vulnerable or displaced from your home, she said carefully. Vulnerable. Displaced. Harold truly knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough to prepare for the possibility that our own son would fail me. My fingers shook as I opened the envelope. Inside were property documents, bank statements, and one sealed letter with my name written across the front in blue ink. Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry. I could barely breathe as I held Harold's letter in my hands. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as though every secret he carried during his final months had settled into those folded pages. Margaret quietly excused herself from the office to give me privacy, closing the door softly behind her. For several seconds, I only stared at my name written across the envelope in his familiar handwriting. Harold always wrote slowly and carefully. Even grocery lists looked formal when he wrote them. I traced my finger over the blue ink before finally opening the letter. Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry. First, I need you to know something very clearly. None of what happens next is your fault. My vision blurred instantly. Harold had always known exactly what to say whenever life became difficult. During layoffs, illnesses, miscarriages, and funerals, he carried calmness like a shield around our family. Even now, after death, he was still trying to protect me from pain. I continued reading slowly. I noticed changes in Caleb after he married Vanessa. At first, I believed it was normal distance. Marriage changes people. But over time, I realized something deeper was happening. Conversations became transactional. Visits became shorter. Every discussion somehow returned to money. I closed my eyes briefly as memories resurfaced one after another. Vanessa criticizing our anniversary gift because it was too sentimental. Caleb pressuring Harold to sell the lake cabin that had belonged to his grandfather. The awkward silences whenever I mentioned family traditions or holiday dinners. At the time, I convinced myself I was simply struggling to accept that my son had grown older. Mothers are good at making excuses. For the people they love. Harold's letter continued. 6 months ago, I discovered Caleb borrowed against his business without telling us. Vanessa also accumulated substantial personal debt. When I refused to help financially, their behavior toward us changed noticeably. My stomach tightened harder with every sentence. Harold included copies of financial records attached behind the letter. Large balances, late notices, credit accounts I had never heard about. I suddenly understood why Vanessa insisted on controlling every detail after Harold died. Why she pushed me to move into their home instead of staying independent. Why Caleb avoided discussing the estate directly with me. They were not helping me. They were positioning themselves around whatever Harold left behind. A cold feeling settled through my chest, but strangely, it no longer felt like grief alone. It felt sharper, clearer. I did not tell you sooner because I hoped I was wrong, Harold wrote. And because I still believed Caleb would remember who he was raised to be. Tears finally slipped down my cheeks then. Not dramatic sobs. Just quiet tears rolling silently across my face while the office remained completely still around me. I remembered Caleb at 8 years old building birdhouses with Harold in our garage. Caleb at 16 saving money from his grocery store job to buy me perfume for Mother's Day. Caleb carrying me around the kitchen after my knee surgery because he did not want me walking upstairs alone. Somewhere along the way, that boy disappeared. Or maybe I simply stopped seeing the truth clearly because I loved him too much. At the bottom of the letter, Harold's handwriting became shakier. There is one final thing you need to know. The house on Willow Creek Road was never transferred into Caleb's name. Legally, it belongs entirely to you. I stared at the sentence repeatedly, hardly believing it. Vanessa had thrown me out of my own home. The realization settled over me slowly, almost calmly. Every cruel word she spoke on that porch suddenly sounded different in my memory. Not confident, desperate. I folded the letter carefully back into the envelope just as someone knocked softly on the office door. Margaret stepped inside carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a sympathetic expression. "Mrs. Carter," she said gently, "there is more your husband wanted you to see." Margaret sat across from me quietly while I tried to steady my breathing. The coffee she placed beside me had gone untouched, steam slowly disappearing into the cold office air. She reached for another folder inside the envelope and slid it carefully across the desk. "Your husband updated these documents 3 weeks before his passing," she explained softly. "He specifically instructed the bank to delay notifying anyone except you." I opened the folder slowly. Inside were property records, trust agreements, and copies of legal correspondence from Harold's attorney. Every page carried his signature near the bottom in dark blue ink. Organized, precise, thoughtful, just like him. Why would Harold hide all of this from Caleb? I asked quietly, though deep down I already knew the answer. Margaret hesitated before speaking carefully. "Because your husband became concerned that Caleb and Vanessa were preparing to pressure him into selling the Willow Creek property." My fingers tightened around the papers instantly. Willow Creek was not simply a house. Harold built that home himself room by room over nearly 7 years. Every Saturday morning, he worked beside local contractors while Caleb followed him around carrying nails in a tiny red toolbox. I painted every bedroom myself. We planted maple trees in the backyard the year Caleb turned 10. That house held birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, and 43 years of ordinary moments that mattered more than expensive vacations or luxury cars ever could. The thought of Vanessa treating it like an investment opportunity made my stomach twist. Margaret opened another file and lowered her voice further. "Your husband also established a separate retirement account under your name only. Caleb does not know it exists." I looked up sharply. "How much?" She adjusted her glasses before answering gently. "Enough that you will never need to depend on anyone again." The room fell completely silent. For months after Harold died, I lived with the quiet humiliation of needing help. I watched Vanessa monitor grocery receipts. I noticed Caleb exchanging tense glances whenever household bills arrived. Every kindness carried invisible conditions attached to it. I stopped buying small comforts for myself because I did not want to feel like a burden in their home. And all this time, Harold had already made sure I would be safe. My throat tightened painfully. He knew they would turn on me. I whispered. Margaret did not answer immediately. Instead, she folded her hands and looked toward the window overlooking downtown Millbrook. "I think your husband hoped they would not," she finally said. "But he prepared in case they did." That sounded exactly like Harold. Practical even when his heart was breaking. I looked down again at the documents spread across the desk. Legally, the Willow Creek house belonged entirely to me. The retirement account belonged entirely to me. Even several investment properties I barely remembered discussing years ago were secured under trusts that Vanessa and Caleb could not touch. Suddenly, the fear that had followed me since leaving the house the night before began fading into something unfamiliar. Clarity. For the first time since Harold's funeral, I no longer felt powerless. My phone buzzed suddenly against the desk, interrupting the silence. Caleb's name appeared across the screen. I stared at it for several seconds before answering. "Mom," he said quickly, his voice tense. "Where are you? Not how are you. Not are you safe. Just where are you?" I leaned back slowly in the chair. "Why?" A pause followed. Then Vanessa's voice appeared faintly somewhere behind him. "Ask her if she signed the transfer papers before she left." My entire body went still. Transfer papers. So that was the rush. That was why Vanessa pushed me out so quickly. They believed I had already signed something during the chaos after Harold's death. Caleb cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mom, there are a few estate documents we still need completed." I glanced down at Harold's handwriting one more time before speaking calmly. "I think I should review everything very carefully first." Another silence stretched across the line, heavier this time. Then for the first time in months, I heard uncertainty in my son's voice. After the call ended, I sat motionless in Margaret's office while my phone rested quietly in my lap. Caleb had sounded nervous. Not grieving, not concerned. Nervous. There was a difference, and once I heard it clearly, I could not unhear it. Margaret watched me carefully from across the desk. "You handled that well," she said softly. I let out a slow breath and looked down at Harold's letter once more. "I spent months believing I was becoming helpless," I admitted quietly. "Now I think they needed me to believe that." Saying the words aloud changed something inside me. The humiliation from the porch the night before still hurt, but underneath it now sat a calmness I had not felt since before Harold died. Vanessa wanted me emotional, confused, dependent. Instead, I was beginning to understand exactly what game she had been playing. Margaret handed me a business card with an attorney's name embossed neatly in silver letters. Harold trusted him completely, she explained. I strongly recommend speaking with him before signing anything. I slipped the card carefully into my purse beside the envelope. Outside the bank windows, downtown Millbrook bustled with ordinary weekday life. Women carried shopping bags past the pharmacy. A teenager hurried across the crosswalk balancing coffee cups. Somewhere nearby, church bells chimed 11 o'clock. Strange how the world continues moving normally while your entire understanding of your family changes overnight. Before leaving the bank, I asked Margaret one final question. Did Harold ever seem angry? She smiled sadly and shook her head. No, mostly heartbroken. That answer hurt more than anything else. Harold loved Caleb deeply. Even after all the financial deception and emotional distance, he still hoped our son would remember the values we raised him with. Integrity, kindness, loyalty. I walked slowly back to my Buick, carrying the thick envelope against my chest like something fragile. The autumn air felt sharper now, cooler against my skin. For the first time since Harold's funeral, I noticed the trees changing color. Along Main Street, deep orange leaves scattered across the sidewalks while cold sunlight reflected off store windows. Life had not ended because my son disappointed me. Painful as that realization was, it also carried a strange freedom. I drove directly to the Willow Creek house. My house. The closer I got, the tighter my chest became. I had not planned on returning so soon, but something inside me needed to see it again with clear eyes. When I pulled into the driveway, Vanessa's white SUV sat parked near the garage, while movers carried several cardboard boxes through the front door. I stared in disbelief. They had already started reorganizing the house less than 24 hours after throwing me out. Through the living room window, I spotted Vanessa directing movers while holding her phone against one shoulder. She looked comfortable there, confident, like a woman settling into a future she believed belonged to her. I remained inside the car for several quiet seconds before stepping out slowly. One of the movers glanced at me politely while carrying a lamp toward the garage. Then Vanessa noticed me through the front window. Her expression froze instantly. She hurried outside, pulling the door sharply behind her. Evelyn, she said quickly, forcing a thin smile. You should have called first. I looked past her shoulder into the house where my family photographs still hung along the hallway wall. Why are there movers here? For a brief moment, panic flashed across her face before disappearing behind practiced politeness. We are just reorganizing a few things. Caleb thought it might help everyone move forward. Move forward. As though Harold's life could be packed into storage boxes and stacked neatly inside a garage. My eyes drifted toward the dining room chandelier Harold installed himself the Christmas before Caleb left for college. I remembered standing beneath it while our son opened acceptance letters at the table. We were so proud that night, so certain we had built something solid. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. Honestly, Evelyn, this tension is exhausting for everyone. I looked directly at her then, really looked at her without grief clouding my judgment for the first time, and suddenly I understood something important. Vanessa was not calm because she was powerful. She was calm because she believed I still did not know the truth. I held Vanessa's gaze steadily while the movers continued carrying boxes behind her. Somewhere upstairs, cabinet doors opened and closed with dull hollow sounds that echoed through the house Harold built with his own hands. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beneath my silence. She was used to controlling conversations by overwhelming people with confidence and polished explanations. But silence unsettles manipulative people because they cannot predict what it means. You really should not be stressing yourself like this, she said finally, smoothing the sleeve of her expensive cream sweater. After everything that happened with Harold, you need rest. Rest. The word almost made me smile. For months, she treated me like fragile furniture. Too emotional to manage paperwork. Too forgetful to understand finances. Too old to make decisions without supervision. Every insult wrapped carefully inside fake concern. I glanced toward the front porch where the potted chrysanthemums I planted in September still sat beside the railing. One of them had begun wilting from neglect. Harold used to water them every morning before breakfast while listening to old jazz records through the kitchen window. The memory hit me softly, but no longer shattered me. Grief was changing shape now. Less like drowning. More like waking up slowly after a long illness. "Where is Caleb?" I asked calmly. Vanessa folded her arms tighter. "At work." Another lie. I recognized it instantly by the way she avoided eye contact afterward. Caleb's truck sat parked behind the garage where she assumed I could not see it from the driveway. For reasons I did not fully understand yet, they wanted to handle this conversation separately. Maybe Caleb could not face me directly anymore. Or maybe Vanessa did not trust him to stay loyal under pressure. A small movement near the upstairs window caught my attention. Liam stood partially hidden behind the curtain staring down at me. His dark hair looked messy like he had just woken from a nap. The moment our eyes met, his face brightened slightly. Then Vanessa noticed him and immediately turned back toward the house. "Liam, go finish your homework," she called sharply. He disappeared from the window without a word. Something about that moment settled painfully inside my chest. Children always sense tension long before adults admit it exists. I remembered Caleb at Liam's age hiding quietly near the staircase whenever Harold and I argued about money during difficult years. We always apologized afterward because we never wanted our son growing up in a house filled with coldness. Yet somehow Caleb created exactly that environment for his own child. Vanessa stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Evelyn, I think we both know this situation has become unhealthy." Unhealthy. Another carefully chosen word. Not cruel. Not selfish. Unhealthy. People like Vanessa never describe their actions honestly because honesty exposes too much. I reached into my purse slowly and removed the folded property document Margaret had given me at the bank. Vanessa's confident posture tightened almost instantly the moment she recognized the paper. I watched the exact second fear entered her eyes. "Interesting," I said quietly. "Because according to these documents, this house still belongs entirely to me." The color drained from her face so quickly it almost looked unreal. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. The movers continued working behind the front door, completely unaware that the balance of power had shifted in a single sentence. Vanessa swallowed hard before forcing a laugh that sounded thin and unnatural. There must be some misunderstanding. But now her voice carried something new underneath it. Panic. I folded the document carefully and slipped it back into my purse. "I do not think so." Before she could answer, the front door opened behind her and Caleb stepped outside. The moment he saw the expression on Vanessa's face, his shoulders stiffened immediately. He looked exhausted, pale, smaller somehow than the confident businessman he pretended to be around everyone else. His eyes moved slowly between us before landing on me. "Mom," he said quietly. Not 1 ounce of warmth in his voice. Only worry. I looked at my son standing on the porch where Harold once taught him how to carve pumpkins every October, and for the first time in my life, I realized Caleb was afraid of me. The three of us stood in silence beneath the fading afternoon light while dry autumn leaves scraped softly across the driveway. Caleb looked from Vanessa to me with the exhausted expression of a man realizing a carefully constructed story was beginning to collapse. I had seen that look once before many years ago when he was 17 and crashed Harold's truck after lying about where he spent the evening. Back then, he confessed immediately because guilt still mattered to him. Now he simply looked trapped. "Mom," he said again quietly, stepping down from the porch. "Maybe we should talk inside." Inside. As though this were a family misunderstanding that could still be smoothed over with polite conversation and coffee at the kitchen table. I shook my head calmly. "I think we have done enough talking inside this house." Vanessa inhaled sharply beside him. Her eyes never left my purse where the property documents rested. "Evelyn, you are overreacting," she said quickly. "You left voluntarily last night." I almost admired how naturally dishonesty came to her. Not dramatic lies, just subtle rewrites of reality designed to make everyone else question themselves. "Did I?" I asked softly. Vanessa opened her mouth, then stopped, because we both remembered exactly what she said while pushing my suitcase across the porch. Caleb rubbed his forehead tiredly before speaking again. "Mom, we never wanted things to happen like this." There it was. Not an apology, just regret that their plan was failing. I looked at my son carefully. His jacket hung wrinkled over his shoulders, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Whatever financial problems Harold uncovered had clearly worsened. But instead of asking for help honestly, Caleb and Vanessa chose manipulation. They chose humiliation. And somehow that hurt more than the money ever could. A sudden sound interrupted the tension. The front door opened again, and Liam stepped outside carrying his backpack. "Grandma?" asked uncertainly. Vanessa immediately stiffened. "Liam, go back inside." But he ignored her and hurried down the porch steps toward me. Before anyone could stop him, he wrapped both arms tightly around my waist. The simple warmth of that hug nearly broke something inside me. I rested one hand gently against the back of his head while breathing slowly to steady myself. "Dad said you moved away," Liam mumbled against my coat. "But your flowers are still here." Children notice everything adults overlook. I swallowed carefully before answering. "I have not moved away, sweetheart." Vanessa stepped forward quickly. "Liam, enough." Her voice sounded sharper now, thinner beneath the pressure building around her. Caleb glanced at her with visible irritation for the first time since I arrived. Small cracks were beginning to appear between them. Liam reluctantly stepped back, but stayed close beside me, clutching the sleeve of my coat. I remembered holding Caleb's hand exactly that way during thunderstorms when he was little. The memory landed softly in my chest, painful but strangely distant now, like a photograph fading from sunlight. I looked back toward the house. Through the open doorway, I could still smell lemon furniture polish and the faint scent of Harold's pipe tobacco lingering in the hallway walls after all these years. My home, my memories, my marriage. Vanessa had treated it like an asset waiting to be claimed. But Harold knew her better than I did. He saw the greed beneath the polished smiles long before I allowed myself to. Caleb finally spoke again, quieter this time. "What do you want us to do?" The question settled heavily between us. Not because I did not know the answer, but because I suddenly realized how much had changed overnight. 24 hours earlier, I would have begged for peace. I would have accepted excuses simply to keep my family together. But standing there now with Harold's documents in my purse and Liam's small hand holding onto my sleeve, I understood something clearly for the first time in months. Peace built on humiliation is not peace at all. I looked directly at Caleb. "First, I want every mover out of my house." Neither of them argued, because now they finally understood something Harold learned before he died. I was not the helpless widow they believed they could control. The movers left within 20 minutes. None of them asked questions. They simply carried the unopened boxes back into the truck, while Vanessa stood near the doorway with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Caleb barely spoke during the entire process. He looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with work. More like a man realizing every shortcut he took had finally led him somewhere he could not escape. Liam stayed beside me quietly on the porch swing Harold built 15 years earlier. The chains creaked softly beneath our weight, while the late afternoon sun dipped lower behind the maple trees. I remembered countless evenings sitting there beside Harold watching Caleb throw baseballs across the yard with neighborhood kids until darkness forced everyone inside. Back then our lives felt simple, honest. I wondered now if families slowly break apart all at once, or if tiny fractures begin years before anyone notices. Vanessa finally approached once the truck disappeared down the street. Her makeup remained perfect, but the polished confidence she wore so easily before had started slipping. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone," she said quietly. Not remorse, not accountability, embarrassment. I looked at her calmly. "You threw a widow out of her own house less than 4 months after her husband died." Her jaw tightened instantly. We were under pressure. I almost laughed at how quickly selfishness transforms into victimhood when consequences arrive. Caleb stepped onto the porch before I could answer. "Vanessa, stop." She turned toward him sharply. "Do not start acting like this is all my fault." The silence that followed felt heavy and old, like an argument they had repeated privately many times before. Caleb ran one hand across his face tiredly. "I never said it was." For the first time since Harold died, I saw clearly into my son's marriage. Not glamorous, not powerful, just two frightened people drowning in debt and bad decisions while pretending success mattered more than integrity. Vanessa glanced toward me bitterly. "You have no idea what we have been dealing with." But I did know. Harold's documents explained enough. Business loans, missed payments, credit cards hidden beneath other credit cards, expensive cars, luxury vacations posted online, while financial pressure quietly crushed them behind closed doors. They spent years building an image they could no longer afford to maintain. And somewhere along the way, they decided Harold and I existed mainly as financial rescue plans. Caleb lowered himself slowly onto the porch step across from me. He suddenly looked much older than 42. Dad refused to help us, he admitted quietly. Hearing him say it aloud hurt more than I expected. Not because Harold refused, but because Caleb still sounded resentful about it. Your father offered advice, I replied softly. That is different from writing checks every time life becomes difficult. Caleb stared at the driveway without answering. Deep down, I think he knew I was right. The front screen door creaked open again, and Liam stepped outside, carrying a faded photo album in both hands. Grandpa used to keep this in his office, he said quietly. He sat beside me and opened it carefully across our laps. Inside were old family photographs spanning decades. Christmas mornings, fishing trips, school graduations, Harold teaching Caleb how to ride a bicycle in our driveway while I stood nearby, laughing behind the camera. Liam pointed toward one picture. Dad looked happy back then. The innocence in his voice nearly broke my heart. Caleb looked down at the photograph silently. Something fragile shifted across his face before disappearing again behind exhaustion and shame. I closed the album gently and rested my hand over it. People can lose themselves sometimes, I said quietly. But that does not mean they are lost forever. Vanessa looked away immediately, uncomfortable with tenderness she could not control. The porch grew quiet except for distant traffic drifting through the neighborhood. Then Caleb finally looked at me directly for the first time all day. His eyes were red around the edges now. Mom, he said softly, almost like the little boy he used to be. I do not know how to fix this. I looked at my son sitting beneath the porch light Harold installed with his own hands years ago, and for the first time since all of this began, I realized something important. Justice and forgiveness are not always the same thing.